Hi, this is Jerry McLaughlin, co-author of the book Cold Wax Medium: Techniques, Concepts, and Conversations, and co-producer of Cold Wax Medium, a video workshop. Welcome to Ask Jerry and Rebecca, a video series answering all your questions about cold wax medium. Good morning and welcome to this episode of Ask Jerry and Rebecca. I'm Jerry McLaughlin and I'm coming to you today from my office in Oakland, California. And today's question is about using oil pastels with cold wax medium, and it's been one of our most frequent and popular questions on our website. So today's question comes from several people. Mara Manning, Nancy McKay, Larry Heumann, Paula Lazar, Kathleen Roman, Leslie Riley, and Tammy Bone. And I want to thank you for this question. Before we start, I wanted to go over what oil pastels are made of and why that's important to whether or not you should use them. So to make sure I had accurate information, I went to the Foundation of the American Institute for Conservation to review the ingredients of oil pastels. And oil pastels are primarily made of a pigment or a dye, some type of wax, usually paraffin or microcrystalline, a little bit of filler, which is usually calcium carbonate or marble dust, they're the same thing. And then a non-drying oil. And that non-drying oil is usually coconut oil or mineral oil or a combination of the two. Now, the most important aspect of whether or not you should use oil pastels with cold wax medium has to do with this non-drying oil. And what do I mean by a non-drying oil? Well, let's start with what a drying oil is. So oil paints are made from usually linseed or poppy seed or safflower oil. And cold wax medium is made from beeswax and a little bit of resin usually. When those two things spend time either together or separate in oxygen, they actually oxidize and come together to form a polymer, so that when oil paints dry or oil and cold wax medium paints dry, it's not truly a simple drying process. It's actually a chemical process of oxidation that forms a polymer that ultimately leads to a fairly tough and durable surface on both oil paintings and cold wax paintings. Now, that's not true with oil pastels. Oils like coconut oil and mineral oil don't have those kinds of chemical components so that they can oxidize. So they essentially stay oily over decades or perhaps even centuries. And what that means is that an oil painting will ultimately dry and form a tough surface, but an oil pastel painting will stay oily and soft forever, so that if you bump them or touch them, they have the possibility of some kind of damage or smearing of the image. Now, why would somebody want to use oil pastels? Well, good oil pastels are usually very saturated in color. They have a very nice soft consistency to work with, and they can hold a really nice crisp edge. And that's really good if you want to create a line or a shape that has intensity and sharp edge. So when people ask about using them with cold wax, they usually ask the question in one of three ways. First, can I use oil pastels throughout the process of building my cold wax paintings? We would generally discourage that. And although I know a fair amount of people do it, the concern that I have is that you have these layers of non-drying oil between layers of drying oils. And I do get afraid that there might be some separation of those layers over time. The second question comes when people ask, can I mix oil pastels and cold wax medium together and then paint with that? And I would definitely discourage that. And the reason is that you're mixing a non-drying oil with a drying oil as a mixture. And I would definitely be concerned that that non-drying oil might interfere with the polymerization of those drying oils and the wax, and that you might end up with a surface that is far less tough and much more fragile than you're going to expect. And that over time, with the damage that comes from moving and things like that, you're going to end up with a damaged surface. And then the last question people ask is, can I use oil pastels on the final surface of my painting? And people ask this because they want a hard, sharp line or a shape with a crisp edge. And once again, I would discourage this. And the reason is that you're taking a painting that's going to cure and form a really tough, durable surface, and then you're going to put a non-drying, fragile surface on top of that. And unless you protect that painting in some way, it's always going to be susceptible to damage from bumping or touching in the transport or hanging or moving process. And if you look at oil pastel paintings, they're generally in a frame and under glass or some other kind of protective coating so that they don't get touched or damaged. Now, you could take a cold wax painting with oil pastels on the surface and frame it and put it behind glass, and that would be perfectly acceptable. But I do think it's a bit of a tragedy to put a barrier of glass between your viewer and your cold wax painting. Cold wax surfaces are so rich and organic and tactile that everyone wants to get up close and look at them. And sometimes they even want to just touch them. And if you put a piece of glass between your painting and your viewer, that's a real disappointment for both the viewer and the artist because there's something lost in that barrier. So if the answer to the question is broadly no, we would recommend that you not use oil pastels with cold wax paintings. Then the follow-up question is, well, what's my alternative? And is there an alternative? And the answer is an absolute yes. And I think both Rebecca and I think that you have two very good alternatives. And the alternative is to not use an oil pastel, but use an oil stick. And what is an oil stick? An oil stick is really oil paint and wax and linseed oil. Pigment and wax and linseed oil in a ratio that's much more like a crayon or an oil pastel. And the beauty of those is that they dry over time because they have linseed or some other drying oil in them. And the two brands that we recommend are either R&F pigment sticks or Winsor Newton oil bars. And both of these have a really nice consistency. R&Fs are much softer than Winsor Newtons. They both have wax and a drying oil, and they both have really good quality intense pigments. So you can cut those edges and form nice, really sharp lines on your surface. You can freely use them throughout the building of your cold wax paintings, and you can definitely mix them together with some wax and paint with them if you want to. So, short answer, we discourage you using cold wax medium and oil pastels together. Alternative, use R&F pigment sticks or Winsor Newton oil bars. So, Mara, Nancy, Larry, Paula, Kathleen, Leslie, and Tammy, thank you for your question, and I hope that that was an answer that helps you as you move forward. Until next time, goodbye.